No matter how experienced you may be in the gym, no matter how strong you are, no matter how much weight you can lift, I can tell you right now, you're not as tough as gravity. Gravity, unlike us humans, is an undeniable force. So when you're in the gym, why not pull with gravity rather than work against it? And by with gravity, what I mean is that you should pull from a higher plane down to a lower plane. When Newton's apple fell, it fell from a high tree branch down to clonk him on the head. When you're weightlifting, your movements, your pulling movements, should be in that same high to low direction. This doesn't actually mean that you have to pull something down towards you. It could, in the case of, say, a lat pull down, but a pull up, on the other hand, is that same beneficial pulling motion, even though you're going up rather than the weight coming down. The key is that in both a pull up and a pull down, your hands are moving downwards. Essentially, you're pulling with gravity. There's an evolutionary argument to be made, of course, for why we should pull with gravity. But there's also a biomechanical argument too. So the evolutionary purpose came, of course, as you might predict, from our ancestry as tree climbers. Now, when early humans were climbing, and other primates, they needed to create downward force on those tree branches in order to propel themselves up higher. This sort of downward force, creating downward force, is the selection pressure. So bodies that were naturally good at creating downward force, that had the muscles and the bones to adapt to this movement, those were the ones that were favored to survive. As such, many primates, including us humans, are able to create that downward force so effectively. The biomechanical argument comes from a study that I took from the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, which tells why humans are better equipped, or how humans are better equipped to pull down with gravity than up against gravity. This study, which was authored by a kinesiology team at the University of Waterloo, Governor, is one that basically examined how 3 different discrete pulling movements affected the compressive forces on the L4, L5 vertebral joint. The exercises were the inverted row, the bent over row, and the one-arm cable row. Of those 3, can you guess which row put the greatest amount of strain on the lower back? If you said the bent over row, you'd be right. That's because the bent over row is the only row where you're actually pulling upwards against gravity. With the other 2 rows, you're pulling either neutrally or with gravity. Because you're pulling against gravity, you're placing more strain, significantly more strain, on the L4, L5 joint, which means more damage is done when you're bent over rowing to your lower back. Now is a good time for me to note that of those 3 exercises, while the bent over row placed the greatest amount of strain on the lower back, there weren't significant differences between the one-arm cable row and the inverted row. So rather than pulling with gravity, this video would almost have had a better title with something like, I don't know, don't pull against gravity. So gravity doesn't have to be your friend. You don't always have to pull directly downwards. The trick is just to not pull upwards. Avoid exercises where you're bending over and pulling something towards you. Pulling with gravity is what our bodies evolved to do. That's why I recommend sticking with exercises like the pull-up or lat pull-down, or even the single arm cable row, but I say stay away from, the bent over row. It's when you work against gravity that you can injure yourself and damage your joints. Pull with gravity, do what our bodies evolved to do, and you'll get stronger and fitter, and you won't damage your spine.